Well, good day everyone. This is the final video in my series on restoring the Ageron French fusee coach clock. I'm doing this to share some closing thoughts and remarks primarily for the customer and owner of the piece, but also for anyone who owns a similar piece or a timepiece of similar vintage. So I'd like to start with basic care and instructions for proper winding of this piece. The first obvious thing should be this was designed to be hung, and so because of the force of gravity, things may not work the same, or it may not keep the same time if you leave it laying on the table like I have it here. Versus hanging. It really should be hung. And then when it comes to winding it, I have it marked here, and I will eventually remove these when I polish the case. But I have it marked here T and A. This is for the time mechanism, and this is for the alarm mechanism. Now, there's something of note in this clock. The alarm mechanism does not have a snooze button or a button you can push to turn it off. So the only way it's going to be turned off is if it just completely winds down. And so if you don't want the alarm mechanism running, don't even wind it. But I'm going to provide keys, but winds counterclockwise, and something of note is that this has a stop mechanism to it. It has a mechanism that will block it and prevent it from being overwound. And so you'll wind it a number of times, and then you'll feel the stop mechanism. You won't be able to go any further. There is this myth out there about overwinding a watch or overwinding a clock. That is a myth, because typically it means that the clock or watch is wound up and it is not running. If you truly overwind a watch or a clock, if you force it past the stop, you will break things, you will hear things break and or likely explode, because you're dealing with the mainspring here. So just don't force it past that point where you can't wind it anymore, and it should be fine. On the front, setting the time is very simple. You've got the square here, and some, in some watches you use the key to turn the square. Quite frankly, this is a clock, so you can just move the hands. Again, well, not again, but do not set the hands backwards. Certainly past the hour, only set the hands forward. And you should be fine. If you're running this over the course of a time change and you have to set the clock backwards, this vintage of clock, simply let the clock wind down, let it stop, and let the hour pass, rewind the clock, and set the time forward. Do not set the time backwards. Antique clocks do not have a self-correcting mechanism, and again, you may break things if you set the time backwards. To set the alarm, this hand here is the alarm hand, so it's set at 6 o'clock. This little key here, or this little square, is for setting the alarm, and the alarm mechanism, both modern and antique like this, never move the alarm mechanism hand, never go forward, always go in return, and counterclockwise, because if you go forward, you will break things, especially if you go past 12 hours. So always go in reverse on the alarm mechanism. And then this hand here is the calendar hand. There again, just like the minute hand, you can set that by hand, just move it by hand. The only time that you want to be careful not to set the calendar is usually it is engaging between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. So if it's at that time on your clock, do not set the calendar. You can set it any other time of the day if it's off, but between 9 and 1 a.m., do not set the calendar. And that is pretty much it. There is no winding of the repeater mainspring. You actually wind the repeater mainspring when you pull on the little bob down below. And that is it for the winding and the setting of this clock. So in review of everything that I did to this piece, I made a total of 16 gears for this mechanism, 9 steel pinions, and 7 brass gears. I also made 4 screws, a spring, an alarm hammer, and 2 eccentric bushings. I replaced the mainspring, and I replaced the hairspring and had to alter the hairspring so that it would work more appropriately. In addition to all this, I completely serviced the clock, which includes complete disassembly, cleaning it, and reassembly. Now, concerning the history of this piece, my research has shown that Francois Ageron was active as a clockmaker from 1741 to 1783 when he died. To put this in context, this would have been before the French Revolution and before Canada had become a nation. And some things that happened during Ageron's lifetime would have been things like the French and Indian War and the United States of America becoming a nation. Other things that were invented in this time period would have been the lightning rod and the sextant used for navigating, the improved steam engine, which would years later, be employed in steamboats, and even the first English dictionary was written in this time period. Think of it, this clock was made in a range of 240 to 280 years ago. The customer early on expressed his interest in using this clock as a regular timepiece in his house. While I'm confident in its ability to work correctly, I would actually discourage this use of the clock. Allow me to explain by way of an example. If you owned a curved dash Oldsmobile back from a time when cars were referred to as horseless carriages, would you use this as your daily driver as you commuted to and from work? Would you use it to run errands or get groceries? I hope you wouldn't. But think, the curved dash Oldsmobile is just 120 years old. And we're really talking about a clock that's easily twice as old. So how should you use this age of clock? Well, how would you use the Oldsmobile? I suspect those that own such vehicles primarily store them, but on occasion, On a nice summer day, they fire it up and drive it around the neighborhood just to get it out of the garage, perhaps for a parade, or perhaps to take children or grandchildren for a ride. In similar fashion, it's okay to appreciate a clock without it being in constant use. But occasionally, while entertaining family or having a dinner party, or for no particular reason at all, it's okay to wind it and run it for a day. After all, what machine made in the 1700s is still able to work today? And then there are the performance and maintenance issues. Are there any records of how frequent and what kind of repairs were required of those early automobiles? I suspected you needed to get an oil change more frequent than every 3 months or 30,000 miles. And I suspect that major engine repairs were required more frequently than is expected of modern vehicles. Again, similarly, we cannot judge an antique clock by modern standards, both in respect of performance and maintenance. You'll note that there is no second hand on this clock. Clocks and watches of this vintage were not that accurate. Being within 5 to 10 minutes a day is perfectly acceptable. And did you know that timepieces of this age were serviced on a yearly basis, not the 5 to 10 years modern mechanical clocks can go? This was in part due to the use of organic lubricants like whale oil or olive oil. These oils broke down and became rancid and had to be cleaned out and refreshed more regularly. But it was also because the mechanisms were more crude, they had higher friction, and they got dirtier quicker due to environmental factors. While today we have synthetic oils that don't go rancid like the organic oils, we still have to deal with the crudeness and the friction issues within these antique pieces. And those issues by themselves are going to require more regular maintenance than we have come to expect from modern mechanical timepieces. And it's these friction issues that cause me as a repairer to recommend against the constant and daily use of timepieces this old. As a repairer and a restorer, my primary concern is the long-term integrity of antique timepieces, and I don't like to see them worn down and worn out unnecessarily. By all means, from time to time, wind up your watch or clock and enjoy the fact that you own a timepiece, a machine that's 250 years old or older, a machine that still runs today as it was when it was first made. But see yourself not merely as an owner and a caretaker, but see yourself as a curator, someone who is likewise concerned with the long-term preservation of such a treasure as you have right here. Well, that concludes this video and this series of videos concerning this restoration project. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I want to thank the customer for entrusting me with this timepiece. To all of you that have tuned in and subscribed to my channel, I want to thank you, and I simply ask that you stay tuned as more repair and restoration videos will come in the future. My intent is to post a video about every 2 weeks. So thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.